Hello and welcome to the Expanse Abridged Podcast series. We're covering book Leviathan Wakes and we're on chapter 3, and this is a Holden chapter. It's quite a fun little chapter, get some space flight, it's quite interesting. Not too much happens, it's more about setting the scene for future things. But yeah, we open with, so we last saw Holden, they were doing that big gravity break to go check out the wreck of the Scopuli, whatever the fuck it's called. And they were just finishing that, so we open with Holden complaining about his back and his knees aching, because he's had 2 days doing that really big break, which means high gravity. And as they're doing it, they're talking about they're going to fly the Knight, which is their little shuttle. So the Canterbury's a big ship, Knight's a little shuttle, they're going to fly the Knight over. And Holden's like, yo, who we got, Naomi? And Naomi's like, Alex Kamal is on ready rotation, and a guy called Valka is not, but Holden's like, I wish it was Valka, because Valka's quieter. And Naomi says she likes Alex because he's ebullient. Holden doesn't know what that means, but luckily, because I'm a dedicated podcast host, I right-clicked on the word and found out it means cheerful and loud. So Holden doesn't want Alex because Alex is noisy, basically. Holden starts walking up, and you can see in the background Naomi's smiling at him because he's moaning and groaning and complaining because he doesn't like the gravity, while Naomi is completely fine. And Holden goes, I don't know how belters, thin as pencils, bounce back from high gravity so quickly. Must be something about genes and practice. Which is quite, I don't know, it's a bit meta, the author's just being like, yeah, I don't know, mate, but science does that. Holden is like, he says he lets a small groan slip out because he's all achy after these 2 days of like basically heavy gravity, so he's been lying on his back and that. And it's contrasted against the switches on the ship clicking sharply as Holden's groaning about. Then we're introduced to Alex, so just going back through the photos. There's Holden, nice. Naomi, nice. And here's Alex Kamal. In real life, he got done for like sexual harassment because he's a nonce. And that's why he got killed in the TV show pretty early. Because in the books he stays around for a lot longer. So yeah, bit of a dodgy bloke, which is a bit of a shame. But you always get bad apples, I suppose. It's a shame. Because he's a fun character in the books, and he's like the opposite of what he seems to be in real life. Like you think, yeah, because in the books he's like an absolute charmer family man, and then here he's a bit of a nonce, so it sucks. But at least the casting's fairly accurate. He's slender than Holden because he's Martian, so lower gravity, so he's taller. But it says the flight suit stretches against his spreading waistline because he used to be flying with the Marines and now he's fat. And he's also, which is quite, I think, a fun take for the books, is just kind of like from Indian heritage. But the part of Mars he was from was settled by East Indians, Chinese, and a small contingent of Texans, and apparently the Texan drawl is viral. And Holden knows there hasn't been a cowboy on Earth for hundreds of years, and Mars doesn't have a blade of grass that wasn't under a dome, or a horse that wasn't in a zoo. But for some reason they all speak like cowboys, which I think is quite a fun, I don't know, I remember the first time reading that laughing, because it's just quite fun, of like a universe building thing, and a load of like space cowboys basically. So he's got a very good Texan drawl, which is he had a bit in the TV show, it wasn't great, but it's just quite fun. And Holden's all stressed about how he wants to get this over and done with really quickly, doesn't want any messing about, wants to get done before the cant starts rusting. And the crew going over to the Scopuli in the night from the cant is obviously, we've got the two big boys I've shown you, this new guy, then we've got good old Amos. So Amos and Naomi for salvage, and then Shed is there to treat anybody that dies. Now Alex is to fly them back and forth. So they're the team going over. So we've got Alex being like, yep, ready to go. They're flying Tea Kettle, and when introduced that flying Tea Kettle is Navy slang for when, instead of having the really big nuclear reactor, the Jeffrey Epstein drive everybody else has, they're actually flying Tea Kettle, which means they just shoot really hot water out the back of the ship, is the idea. So it's just like, yeah, like a tea kettle basically, and it's better for shorter trips because you don't have a really big plume that could burn stuff, but it's a bit more wasteful, so you can't use it on longer trips is the idea. And then he gets a final message from the ship saying, from Captain McDowell, who I think I had a photo of, yeah, here we are, this the very dark man, he's like, yo, be careful, I've got a thing for Naomi and the ship's expensive. And Ade, who's kind of piloting the cant, is just hanging out back there as well. Nice. So then they go like, cool, we'll fly over. Holden's chilling out, and he can hear the creaks of the Canterbury's final manoeuvres. The steel and ceramics is loud and ominous as the wood planks of a sailing ship, or on Earth's joints after high G, and he says he feels sorry for the ship. There's obviously these narratives you get every time there's space flight in the Expanse. You get this wonderful description about how They weren't really stopping, of course. Nothing in space actually stopped. It only came to a matching orbit with some other object, which is like, they always remind you in the books and stuff like that about like gravity, and it's all relative. But then they pop out in the night and they go find Scopuli, and you kind of get a description of where it is. So it's on this asteroid called CA2216862. It's just hanging out basically in the middle of nowhere between the asteroid belt and Jupiter. So it really isn't like absolute nowhere. And Holden is really unnerved. See the sky of the Scopuli softly resting on the asteroid side. It was a 0.5 kilometre wide roadblock on a highway millions of kilometres in diameter. It hadn't arrived there by accident. He scratched the hair standing up on the back of his neck. So the whole point is Holden's like, this shouldn't be here. Why is it here? It doesn't make any sense. He was given orders like, if anything suspicious would come back, it's not worth checking out. But he's kind of driven by the fact that maybe people there, he wants to go save them. It'd be Holden who is the good guy. Naomi's saying it looks like the reactor's shut down because there doesn't look like too much damage, and there's a distress beacon, and there's definitely not. So there's no damage. There was damage, you see a radiation leak, and they're not seeing one. And then Holden points out that the radar's picking up a huge hole inside of the ship. So then they check the area again. You get quite a nice description that the sensors on the Canterbury are so sensitive they can spot a kid throwing rocks on Luna. So there's nobody within 20 million kilometres of them right now. So you've got this massive ship scanning the area. They're completely empty. It's just them and this little asteroid. And Holden's constantly saying to himself, don't play the hero, which is like the opposite of who he is. And he's like, don't do it. Just be careful, find out. So he gets Alex to... He goes, we'll keep going. So Alex flies them into a couple hundred metres away, and they ride down the mech, which they talk about. And he says, I want us to keep the ship ready to go so we can melt anything behind us if we need to run away. And Alex is like, yeah, we've got the night in a run like a bunny mode till you say otherwise. So they kind of go into the ship, and they realise there's a big hole in it. And Holden says the plan is going to be Amos and him will go around, have a look, while Naomi and Shed will stay near the mech for the time being. Amos is like, yo, can I bring a gun? Holden says, yeah, sure, if you want. But then he says, if the big burly earther mechanic was carrying a gun, it would make him feel better too. But let's not say it. Let them think the guy in charge felt confident, which is quite fun. Very big Holden knowledge. And we get some little background stuff about Amos picked a gun with high caliber automatic that fired self-propelled rounds, recoilless, so it can be used in zero G. So a bit like a bolter from Warhammer that Space Marines use, because a traditional handgun would impart enough thrust to achieve escape velocity from a rock the size of CA2216862. So the idea that, as Miller said in the last chapter, but I don't think I read it out, they need to use like plastic bullets so they don't break the ship sometimes, and here they have to use self-propelled ones so they don't throw themselves off the rock or shoot themselves around because there's no gravity. Then we get a description of the mech, which is the big four-legged thing they're going to use to get in. Apparently it's like an insect, they describe it, with like pairs of legs that can like grab onto the ship and others that can cut it open and spray fire suppressant stuff, which is nice. I mean, they don't go very much into it, but I like the insect stuff. They do it a bit in the later books. It's a bit like H.R. Geiger, who did Alien, and all about this weird sexual life mimicry, insect things of alien stuff. And it's, I don't know, it's a bit of a nice way to describe stuff. You get a description of everyone's checking each other's hats, because they Holden's like hats on before they go on. Then Holden remarks, as he looks back at the night as he's flying over the Scopuli, that it's a blocky grey wedge with a drive cone stuck on the wider end. Like everything else humans built for space travel, it was designed to be efficient, not pretty. That always made Holden a little sad. There should be room for aesthetics, even out here. Which is, I think, quite a nice little line. And it's something you do get quite a bit in the Expanse that describes spaceships. They describe it like apartment blocks with an engine on the bottom. It's all about the way the gravity works. It's like you're accelerating one direction. And I always think it's quite a nice description they use of, they're not like Star Trek or other sci-fi things like the Gothic architecture in Warhammer. The spaceships here are very much practical, and people often like that about the TV show because it seems so realistic. I've already described how realistic it is on like a societal point, and it's kind of cool when you see it in spaceships, even if it means the spaceships are kind of ugly in their own way. So they're flying over, and Holden listens to Naomi, because Naomi's humming to herself, and he just leaves the radio channel open because he quite likes it. Then they get to Scopuli, see the big hole in it, and then Amos notes that it wasn't a torpedo, it was a breaching charge for definite, because of the way the metal's bending in. And you get some background that Amos is the guy that breaks open the icebergs when they're carrying them from Saturn, which is like just more background that Amos is like the cool mechanic explosives guy. So then Holden's like, okay, so it's definitely something sus here, sussy. because someone climbed on the ship, set a breaching charge, and there's no evidence of fighting back or anything. And they get to the ship and they realise everything is still off. And Holden's like, of course it wasn't up and running. Of course something had gone wrong. And asks Amos to keep his big gun out. Naomi cuts open the ship with the big mechanical thing. It's like legs rip it open, melt it all up, and then spray fire suppressant stuff to get them in. And then Holden enters in, and he enters into the galley with flash frozen bits of food crunching under his boots. He goes in first, followed by Amos, and then Holden's like, yo, let's go check out engineering, see why the reactor's off. And they realise as they're going down there, every pressure door is open, which means there's no atmosphere in the ship, and which definitely means no survivors. And when they get to the engineering deck, all the parts and tools are in its place, including the expensive ones, which means it wasn't a robbery, which makes it even more sus, and they're getting stressed. As they keep going through, Amos checks out the reactor, someone's done all the shutdown procedures. He's like, oh shit, it was turned off afterwards, after the blast, someone did it properly, and then emptied all the air to make sure everyone was out. So again, it's just being like, yo, what's this? Why is this so kind of way it is? There's no bodies as well. Holden even says, the lack of bodies was worrying him more than the presence of them. When they realise the ship's kind of in the situation it is. I kind of wish at this point there was more description of the spaceship, like them walking through it, because it is a bit just like dialogue of them going, oh well, yeah, it's weird, isn't it? Then Holden's like, yo, grab the reactor. Was the core out or something that was valuable? And then Amos began a profanity-laced mumble as he worked, which Holden didn't like, so he flipped. It wasn't nearly as charming as Naomi's humming, is the quote. And then they go up to comms to try and find the beacon for the ship. Holden there finds a small black box connected to nothing else, and immediately thinks, is that a bomb? Which is big Holden energy. He gets Amos over, and Amos is like, nah man, it's a transmitter. He's casually just throwing around this thing in his hands. And they realise it's the beacon they actually follow to the ship, rather than, because the actual transmitter the ship has is offline, not plugged in, but they found this little box which somehow is like across the distance of space working. I don't really know how that works, but I'm not a science guy anyway. And then Holden's like, shit, and says, okay boys and girls, found something weird and we're out of here, everyone back to the night and be very careful. And then he gets interrupted by Captain McDowell from the Cant. He's like, boys, there's something, we may have a problem out here. And then bam, chapter ends. So it's a shorter one, this one. I kind of wish I had more descriptions of the spaceship. I think it'd be cool if you could describe it, and I know, kind of, because obviously people that are listening to this and I have, you've seen the TV show, so you kind of remember that. But it'd be cool if they could describe the spaceship in a way, kind of build on the idea of things being efficient, and rather than being aesthetic. And I think the other point I make here is this ending of Jim, we may have a problem out here, from Captain McDowell on the Kent, and then the chapter ends. And I'm pretty certain the next chapter is a Miller one, yeah. Is the big Expanse way of writing. They always end chapters like that. And sometimes it is pretty tiresome. It's a bit annoying because it's very like, it's just constantly egging you on to read it. It makes it very readable, but there are a few points where it gets a bit too much. I remember in some later books, I'm just like, God, just like give me like 4 in a row, advance the plot, and then move to the other one, rather than this constant like edging. It basically just edges you the entire way through a book, which, you know, some people like. I prefer the destination. But yeah, thank you for listening, and I'll see you soon.